It was one of those crisp autumn mornings where the air feels just right cool enough to remind you summer is gone, but warm enough that you don't mind standing outside for a bit. The kind of morning when everything seems calm, like the world hasn't quite woken up yet. Tom was walking his kids to school, something he did almost every day. It wasn't anything special, just part of the routine. But routines have a way of changing when you least expect it. Tom had been on his own for 5 years now. His wife passed away after a long illness, leaving him to raise their 2 children by himself. He did his best, juggling work and parenting, while trying not to let grief swallow him whole. The kids were growing up fast, the older one thoughtful and curious, always asking questions, and the younger one full of energy, bouncing from one thing to the next. They kept him busy, which was both a blessing and a challenge. Busy meant no time to dwell on what he'd lost, but it also meant he didn't always know how to handle all the emotions they carried with them. That particular morning started out like any other. The 3 of them walked together down the familiar path to school, the crunch of leaves underfoot making a satisfying sound. The sun peeked through the trees, casting golden patterns on the sidewalk. Everything seemed normal until they reached the small park near the school. That's when things shifted. There, sitting on the edge of the sidewalk, was a woman. She looked tired, her clothes worn and patched in places. Her hair was messy, as if she hadn't combed it in days, and she held a piece of cardboard with shaky handwriting that read, *hungry. Anything helps. People passed her without stopping, some glancing briefly before looking away, others pretending not to notice at all. The older child stopped suddenly, tugging at Tom's sleeve. "Dad," the kid said, voice filled with urgency. "We should give her something." Tom hesitated. He wasn't sure why exactly. Maybe it was because he didn't want to draw attention. Or maybe it was because seeing someone so clearly struggling made him uncomfortable. It reminded him of his own struggles, the ones he tried hard to hide. Before he could say anything, though, the younger one darted forward. The kid rummaged through the backpack and pulled out a granola bar, running over to hand it to the woman before Tom could stop them. She looked surprised at first, then gave a faint smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of traffic nearby. And just like that, she slipped back into the crowd, disappearing as quickly as she'd appeared. Later that night, as Tom tucked the kids into bed, the older one brought it up again. "Do you think she has a home? Do you think anyone knows her name?" The question hung in the air, simple yet heavy. Tom didn't have an answer. He shrugged it off, telling them not to worry about it, but the truth was, the question stayed with him long after the lights were turned off. What was her story? How had she ended up there? And more importantly, why did his kids seem to care so much about someone they didn't even know? These thoughts swirled around in his head, keeping him awake longer than usual. Little did he know, this chance encounter would set off a chain of events that would change all of their lives in ways none of them could predict. Over the next few weeks, the kids kept spotting her around town. Sometimes she was near the grocery store, other times by the soccer field or the library. Each time, they insisted on giving her something: a snack, a bottle of water, even drawings they'd made during class. They started referring to her simply as the lady, since they never learned her real name. To them, she wasn't just another stranger on the street. She was someone who mattered. One rainy afternoon, the older child came home clutching a soggy piece of paper. It was a note written in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for your kindness. You remind me of better days." Below it was a tiny sketch of a bird mid-flight. Something about that note struck a chord with Tom. For the first time, he felt a pang of curiosity, not pity, but genuine interest. Who was this woman? What was her story? He decided to find out. Not because he wanted to play hero, but because he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. As it turned out, she wasn't just another faceless figure, struggling to get by. She had once been a teacher, a poet, someone with dreams and ambitions that life had somehow derailed. And yet, despite everything she'd been through, she still connected deeply with his kids. That connection sparked something in Tom, too. Watching his children interact with her, seeing the joy and comfort they brought each other, made him realize how much they all had to learn from one another. But little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would test his patience, challenge his beliefs, and ultimately bring unexpected light into their lives. It didn't take long for the kids to start looking out for her. Every time they left the house, whether it was to go to school, play soccer, or grab groceries with their dad, they scanned the streets, hoping to spot her again. Sure enough, she kept showing up in places where you wouldn't expect someone like her to linger, a quiet bench near the library, a shaded corner by the park, or even sitting on the curb outside the bakery. At first, Tom tried to brush it off. He told himself it was just coincidence, that maybe she wandered around aimlessly like so many others who lived on the streets. But deep down, he couldn't ignore how much his kids seemed drawn to her. They'd come home talking about her, how she smiled when they handed her something, how she always said, "Thank you," softly, like she meant it more than most people did. To them, she wasn't just some random person. She felt familiar, like someone they already knew. One day, after school, the younger kid came running into the house, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "Dad, look what she gave me." The excitement in their voice was impossible to miss. Tom unfolded the note carefully and saw the words scribbled in uneven handwriting. Asterisk, "Thank you for your kindness. You remind me of better days." Below the message was a tiny sketch of a bird mid-flight, its wings stretched wide as if ready to soar. Tom stared at the note for a moment, feeling a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, he was proud of his kids for being so thoughtful and compassionate. On the other, he couldn't help but wonder why this woman had such an impact on them. Why were they so determined to connect with her? And why did the note make him feel uneasy, like there was something bigger he was missing? That night, as he tucked the kids into bed, the older one asked, "Do you think anyone knows her name, Dad? Like, does she have family or friends somewhere?" The question caught him off guard. He hesitated before answering, unsure of what to say. "I don't know," he finally admitted, "but I guess we could try to find out." The idea stayed with him long after the lights were turned off. It gnawed at him, not in an urgent way, but in a slow, persistent kind of way. Over the next few days, he found himself thinking about her more often than he cared to admit. Who was she really? What brought her to this point in her life? Was there anything he could do to help, not out of obligation, but because it felt necessary? Finally, one evening, after dropping the kids off at a friend's house, Tom decided to see if he could track her down. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing. Part of him worried they'd think he was overstepping, getting too involved in something that wasn't his business. But another part of him, the part that had been quietly growing louder these past few weeks, knew he couldn't just walk away anymore. He started by retracing the places where the kids had seen her before. The park, the library, the bakery, all the usual spots. At first, he thought he might be wasting his time. She wasn't exactly easy to find, blending into the background like a shadow. But then, as he passed the library again, he spotted her. She was sitting on a bench, staring at a book in her lap, though she didn't seem to be reading it. Her face looked tired, but there was something peaceful about her too, like she'd found a moment of stillness in the chaos of her life. Tom approached cautiously, unsure of how to begin. "Hi," he said, his voice hesitant. She looked up, surprised, then nodded slightly. "Hey," she replied, her tone guarded but not unfriendly. "I'm He fumbled for words, suddenly aware of how awkward he sounded. My kids talk about you a lot. They really like you. A flicker of amusement crossed her face. Your kids already told me all about you, she said with a small laugh. They're good people, those two. The comment caught him off guard. He hadn't expected her to know anything about him, let alone compliment his parenting. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Then, gathering his courage, he blurted out, "Can I buy you a cup of coffee or something? Just to talk?" She studied him for a second, as if trying to decide whether he was sincere. Finally, she shrugged. Sure, why not? They ended up at a small diner a few blocks away. It wasn't fancy, just a cozy little place with checkered floors and a jukebox in the corner. They sat across from each other in a booth, steam rising from their mugs. For a while, neither of them spoke. Tom sipped his coffee nervously, wondering how to break the ice. Eventually, she spoke first. You don't have to do this, you know, she said quietly. I'm not looking for charity. I'm not here for charity, Tom replied quickly. I just wanted to understand. My kids care about you, and I guess I wanted to know why. She smiled faintly, almost sadly. They're sweet. Most people don't look twice at someone like me. That's not true, Tom said, though he knew it kind of was. People saw her, sure, but they rarely saw her the person behind the tattered clothes and weary eyes. So, can you tell me? About yourself, I mean. For a moment, he thought she might shut him down. But instead, she leaned back in her. See, her expression softening. What do you want to know? Anything, he said honestly. Everything. And so, bit by bit, she began to share pieces of her story. She used to be a teacher, she explained, back when life felt simpler. She loved working with kids, helping them discover new things about the world. But then everything changed. She lost her job, struggled to pay rent, and eventually found herself without a home. Depression crept in, making it hard to get back on her feet. Yet through it all, she held on to one thing, poetry. Writing had been her escape, her way of holding on to hope when everything else felt lost as she talked. Tom listened intently, struck by the depth of her words. This wasn't just a woman down on her luck. She was someone with dreams and talents, someone who deserved better than what life had handed her. By the time they left the diner, he felt a strange sense of clarity. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't walk away now. Over the following weeks, the connection between them grew stronger. The kids continued visiting her whenever they could, bringing snacks, art supplies, and stories from their day. Their bond became something special, a lifeline for her and a lesson in empathy for them. Meanwhile, Tom found himself checking in on her regularly, offering whatever support he could. Slowly but surely, they formed a fragile friendship, one built on trust and shared humanity. But friendships like this aren't always easy. There are cracks beneath the surface, doubts and fears waiting to rise up. And soon enough, those cracks would begin to show, testing everyone's resolve in ways they never expected. As the weeks went by, the bond between the family and the woman grew stronger. It wasn't anything dramatic or planned, it just happened naturally, like water finding its way through cracks in the pavement. The kids would visit her whenever they could, bringing little things they thought might make her day brighter, a granola bar from their lunchbox, a drawing they'd made during art class, or even a flower plucked from the garden. To them, she wasn't just someone they saw on the street anymore. She was part of their world now. For their dad, though, it was different. He watched how his kids lit up around her, how they talked about her with such excitement when they got home. She said my picture was beautiful. The younger one would exclaim, holding up a crayon masterpiece. Or the older one would say, she told me she used to teach poetry. Can you believe that? There was something pure and genuine in the way they connected with her, something that made him realize how much they were learning, not just about kindness, but about resilience. Still, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that this new friendship was fragile, like a thin sheet of ice that might crack at any moment. He wanted to help, but he didn't know where to draw the line. Was he doing the right thing by letting his kids get so close to someone whose life was so uncertain? What if something went wrong? These questions swirled in his mind, keeping him up at night. But every time he considered pulling back, he saw the joy in his children's eyes and reminded himself that sometimes the best thing you can do is trust your heart, even if it feels risky. One chilly afternoon, after school, the older kid came running into the house clutching a folded piece of paper. "Dad, look what she gave me," they said breathlessly, handing over the note. It was written in shaky handwriting, the letters uneven but clear. Asterisk. "Thank you for your kindness. You remind me of better days." Beneath the words was a tiny sketch of a bird mid-flight, its wings stretched wide as if ready to soar. Tom stared at the note for a long moment, feeling a lump rise in his throat. It wasn't just the words themselves that struck him. It was the emotion behind them. This woman, who had every reason to be bitter or angry, chose instead to express gratitude. She saw beauty in the smallest gestures, hope in the simplest acts of kindness. And somehow, she was passing that hope along to his kids. That night, as he tucked them into bed, the older one asked, "Do you think anyone else knows her name, Dad? Like, does she have family somewhere?" The question hit him hard. He realized he didn't know much about her beyond the basics. Who was she really? Did she have people who cared about her? Why had no one stepped in to help before now? The next morning, Tom decided to find out more. Not because he felt obligated, but because he genuinely wanted to understand. After dropping the kids off at school, he drove to the library where she often sat. Sure enough, there she was, perched on a bench with a worn paperback in her hands. She looked up as he approached, her expression wary but not unwelcoming. "Hi," he said, sitting down beside her. "Mind if I join you?" She shrugged, closing the book. "Sure. What's up?" "I've been thinking," he began, choosing his words carefully. "My kids really care about you. They talk about you all the time. And, well, I guess I want to know more about you. If you're okay with sharing." She hesitated, studying him for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay, ask whatever you want." And so, bit by bit, she opened up. Her story poured out in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle coming together. She told him how she used to teach elementary school, how she loved helping kids discover the magic of words. She talked about the poems she used to write, how writing had been her escape during tough times. But then everything changed. She lost her job, struggled to keep up with bills, and eventually found herself without a place to live. Depression crept in, making it harder to imagine a way forward. Yet despite it all, she held on to one thing, the belief that someday things would get better. Listening to her, Tom felt a mix of emotion, sadness for what she'd been through, admiration for her strength, and guilt for how easy it was to overlook people like her in everyday life. Most folks walked past without giving her a second glance, assuming she was just another faceless figure on the street. But here she was, full of depth and talent, someone who deserved so much more than the hand life had dealt her. Over the next few days, Tom found himself checking in on her regularly. Sometimes it was just a quick chat while running errands. Other times they'd sit together at the diner, talking about books or music or random memories from childhood. Each conversation deepened their connection, building a foundation of trust. Meanwhile, the kids continued visiting her, their bond growing stronger with each passing week. But friendships like this aren't always smooth sailing. As winter approached, tensions began to surface. Neighbors started noticing the family's interactions with her, whispering behind their backs. Some criticized Tom for getting too involved, warning him that his kids might get hurt emotionally if things didn't work out. Others accused him of enabling her situation, suggesting he should focus on real solutions instead of temporary fixes. Even within his own circle, doubts crept in. A relative called one evening, voicing concerns. "You're setting yourself up for trouble," they said bluntly. "What happens if she disappears? Or worse, what if something bad happens to her? How will the kids handle that?" Tom knew they had a point. He couldn't deny the risks, but he also couldn't ignore the impact this relationship was having not just on her, but on his family too. His kids were learning lessons money couldn't buy: empathy, patience, and the importance of seeing people as human beings rather than stereotypes. For the first time in years, they seemed truly engaged with the world around them, eager to make a difference, however small. Still, the pressure mounted. One rainy afternoon, disaster struck. The kids came home from school upset, saying they couldn't find her anywhere. They'd searched all her usual spots: the park, the library, the bakery, but she was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in as they begged Tom to go look for her. What if she's sick? What if something happened to her? They cried. Reluctantly, Tom grabbed his coat and headed out into the cold. He scoured the streets, asking shopkeepers and passers-by if they'd seen her. Hours passed with no luck, and worry gnawed at him. Finally, late that night, he spotted her huddled in an abandoned warehouse, shivering and weak. Relief washed over him, quickly replaced by concern. She needed help, and not just a warm meal or a blanket. She needed real support, a chance to rebuild her life. Bringing her back to health proved challenging. At first, Tom offered her temporary shelter in their spare room, a decision that sparked heated arguments with friends and family. "You're crossing a line," one person warned. "This isn't your responsibility." But Tom stood firm, knowing deep down that turning away now would mean abandoning someone who desperately needed compassion. Slowly but surely, she began to recover. With encouragement from Tom and the kids, she enrolled in community programs, volunteered at the local shelter, and even started teaching poetry again. Watching her regain confidence filled Tom with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about helping her, it was about rediscovering the power of connection, of seeing humanity in its rawest form. Yet even as things improved, Tom couldn't shake the knowledge that their journey was far from over. Building trust takes time, and healing doesn't happen overnight. But one thing was certain: none of them would ever be the same after meeting her. She had become more than just a stranger on the street. She was a reminder of the beauty and complexity of life, a testament to the fact that everyone has a story worth hearing. Winter hit hard that year, wrapping the town in a blanket of frost and icy winds. The holidays were approaching, but for Tom and his family, the season felt heavier than usual. Their newfound friendship with the woman had brought warmth into their lives, but it also came with challenges they hadn't anticipated. Neighbors whispered behind their backs, some disapproving glances following them as they walked down the street together. A few people even confronted Tom directly. One afternoon, while waiting in line at the grocery store, an older man leaned over and said, "You know, you're setting yourself up for trouble. People like her, they don't change." His tone was sharp, dripping with judgment. Tom clenched his jaw but didn't respond. He'd heard comments like this before, both from strangers and people he thought were friends. At first, it stung. But now, instead of anger, he felt a quiet determination to prove them wrong. This wasn't about fixing someone. It was about supporting her as she rebuilt her own life. The kids noticed the tension, too. They weren't old enough to fully understand what the neighbors were saying, but they could feel the shift in the air. One evening, after overhearing a hushed argument between Tom and a relative, the older child asked, "Dad, why do people care so much about what we're doing? Why can't they just leave us alone?" Tom sighed, sitting down on the couch beside them. "Sometimes people get scared when things are different," he explained gently. "They see something they don't understand, and instead of asking questions, they make assumptions." "But we're not doing anything bad," the younger one chimed in, frowning. "We're helping her, right?" "Exactly," Tom said, ruffling their hair. "And no matter what anyone says, I'm proud of you two for being kind. That's all that matters." Despite his reassurances, the pressure continued to build. Critics argued that Tom was enabling dependency, encouraging a cycle that would only lead to more problems down the road. Even some family members voiced concerns, warning him that involving his kids in such a complicated situation might backfire emotionally. What happens if she disappears again? One relative demanded during a tense phone call. How will they handle that? Tom didn't have easy answers. He knew the risks, he'd thought about them plenty, but pulling away now felt impossible. Over the months, she had become more than just someone they helped occasionally. She was part of their routine, someone who brought laughter and curiosity into their home. More importantly, she reminded them of something essential. Humanity connects us in ways we often overlook. But then, one bitterly cold night, everything changed. The kids had been looking forward to seeing her after school, planning to surprise her with a scarf they'd knitted in art class. When they reached her usual spot near the park, though, she wasn't there. Panic set in almost immediately. "Where is she?" the younger one asked, clutching the scarf tightly. "She's always here." They searched everywhere: the library, the bakery, the corner where she sometimes sat reading. Nothing. As dusk fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and fear turned into desperation. By the time they got home, tears were streaming down their faces. "Dad, we have to find her," the older one pleaded. "What if she's hurt or sick?" Tom tried to stay calm, but inside his heart was racing. He grabbed his coat and headed out into the freezing night, driving slowly through the streets. Hours passed with no sign of her. Each empty alleyway and darkened doorway felt like another dead end. Just as he was about to give up, a faint movement caught his eye near an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. He parked the car and hurried toward the building, pushing open the creaky door. Inside, huddled against the wall, was her figure, trembling and barely conscious. Relief washed over him, quickly replaced by concern. Her lips were cracked, her skin pale from the cold. "Hey," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "It's me. Let's get you somewhere safe." She blinked slowly, her voice weak. "I didn't want to bother anyone." "You're not bothering anyone," he insisted, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. Carefully, he helped her to her feet and guided her back to the car. The drive home was silent except for the hum of the heater filling the cabin with warmth. Bringing her into their house sparked immediate controversy. Some friends and relatives criticized the decision, accusing Tom of crossing boundaries. "You're inviting chaos into your home," one person warned. "This isn't sustainable." Others suggested professional intervention, urging him to contact social services instead of taking matters into his own hands. But Tom refused to turn away. He saw how much she meant to his kids, not as a project or charity case, but as a real person who deserved dignity and support. So, he cleared out the spare room, making it as comfortable as possible. For the first few days, she stayed mostly in bed, recovering from the effects of exposure to the cold. The kids visited her often, bringing books and snacks, eager to cheer her up. Slowly, color returned to her cheeks, and her spirit began to revive as she regained strength. She started opening up more about her past. She talked about the years she spent teaching poetry to children, how writing had been her lifeline during tough times. She admitted that losing her job and home had shattered her confidence, leaving her feeling invisible. But spending time with Tom's family reminded her of the joy she used to find in connecting with others. Your kids? They remind me of why I love teaching, she confessed one evening. They see me. Not just my circumstances, but me. Inspired by their encouragement, she decided to take steps toward rebuilding her life. With Tom's help, she enrolled in community programs designed to assist people transitioning out of homelessness. She began volunteering at a local shelter, sharing her love of poetry with residents. Watching her regain purpose filled Tom with pride, but it also taught him something valuable. Resilience isn't about bouncing back to where you were. It's about finding new ways to move forward. The turning point came one sunny afternoon in early spring. She stood in front of a classroom full of eager students, including Tom's kids, leading a poetry workshop. Her voice was steady, her eyes bright with excitement as she guided them through exercises. It was clear she belonged there back in her element, inspiring young minds. For Tom, seeing her thrive was bittersweet. On one hand, he was thrilled that she'd reclaimed a piece of herself. On the other, he knew their dynamic would inevitably shift. Helping her had been rewarding, but it had also forced him to confront his own fears and doubts. He realized that sometimes the hardest thing to do is trust, not just in others, but in yourself. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the older kid looked at Tom and said, "You know, Dad, I think she saved us too." Tom smiled, unsure how to respond. Maybe it was true. After all, compassion has a way of changing everyone it touches. And in this case, it had brought light into their lives when they needed it most. Spring arrived with a softness that seemed almost magical. The frost melted away, replaced by green shoots pushing through the soil and birds chirping louder each morning. For Tom and his family, this season felt different, not just because of the weather, but because of the changes happening around them. The woman who had once been a stranger on the sidewalk was now standing tall, teaching poetry to a room full of eager kids. Among those students were Tom's own children, their faces lighting up as they listened to her stories and crafted verses of their own. It wasn't an overnight transformation, though. Getting here had taken months of effort, both hers and theirs. She worked hard to rebuild her life, enrolling in community programs, volunteering at shelters, and eventually landing a part-time job at the local library. Each step forward was a victory, no matter how small it seemed. And while she still carried scars from everything she'd been through, there was a newfound strength in her eyes, a spark that hadn't been there before. For Tom, watching her journey unfold was humbling. He often found himself reflecting on his own life, the years he'd spent feeling stuck after losing his wife, the walls he'd built to protect himself and his kids from pain. Helping her had forced him to confront those walls, to realize that sometimes letting people in can be the bravest thing you do. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when doubt crept in, when he wondered if he was doing the right thing or making things worse. But seeing her thrive reminded him why he'd chosen to take the risk. The kids, too, had grown in ways Tom hadn't expected. They weren't just learning about kindness, they were living it. Every day they came home with new insights, sharing snippets of poems they'd written or stories about how she encouraged them to think differently. One evening, the older kid proudly held up a notebook filled with scribbles and doodles. "She says I have a gift for writing," they announced, beaming. "She told me I should keep going." Tom smiled, feeling a swell of pride. This wasn't just about helping someone in need. It was about creating ripples of change that touched everyone involved. His kids were learning empathy, resilience, and the power of connection. They were discovering that even small acts of kindness could make a big difference. And somewhere along the way, they'd helped him rediscover those lessons too. But as much as things improved, there were still challenges. Neighbors continued to whisper, some shaking their heads disapprovingly whenever they saw the family together. A few people outright criticized Tom, accusing him of overstepping boundaries or setting unrealistic expectations for his kids. One neighbor even confronted him directly, saying, "You're giving them false hope, you know." Not everyone gets a happy ending. Tom didn't argue. Instead, he simply replied, "Hope isn't false. It's what keeps us moving forward." Deep down, he knew not every story ends neatly tied with a bow. Life is messy, complicated, and unpredictable. But that didn't mean you stopped trying. Sometimes, the act of reaching out even when you don't know what will happen next is enough to create something meaningful. As weeks turned into months, the bond between them deepened. She became more than just a friend or mentor. She was like an extended part of their family. On weekends, she joined them for picnics in the park or dinners at home. Conversations flowed easily now, laughter filling the air as they shared meals and memories. There was a sense of comfort in knowing they'd walked through difficult times together and come out stronger on the other side. One sunny afternoon, as they sat under a tree during a break from her poetry class, she turned to Tom and said, "I never thought I'd feel this way again. Like I belong somewhere." Her voice was quiet, tinged with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Tom shook his head, smiling softly. "Don't thank me. You did the hard work. We just gave you a little push," she laughed, shaking her head. A little push made all the difference. That moment stayed with him long after they packed up and headed home. It reminded him of something important. We all need help sometimes. No one makes it through life alone. Whether it's a kind word, a listening ear, or simply showing up when it matters most, those small gestures add up. They remind us that we're not invisible, that our struggles don't define us, and that there's always room for second chances. By summer, her life looked vastly different from the winter days spent huddled in abandoned buildings. She rented a tiny apartment near the library, decorated it with thrift store finds and artwork gifted by her students. Teaching poetry became her passion again, and she started mentoring others who were working to rebuild their lives. Watching her flourish filled Tom with gratitude, not just for her, but for the way this experience had changed his family. On a warm June evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the four of them gathered in the backyard for a barbecue. The kids ran around chasing fireflies, their laughter echoing through the night. She sat beside Tom, sipping lemonade and watching them play. "They're amazing," she said quietly. "Your kids. They've got hearts bigger than the sky." Tom chuckled, nodding. "Yeah, they do, and so do you." Later that night, as they cleaned up the dishes, the older kid pulled Tom aside. "Dad," they whispered, "do you think she'll always be part of our lives?" Tom paused, thinking carefully before answering. "I hope so," he said finally, "because she reminds us of something really important, that everyone has value, no matter where they come from or what they've been through. She taught us that kindness isn't just about giving. It's about connecting, about seeing people for who they are." The kid nodded slowly, seeming to understand. Then, with a grin, they added, "And she's fun, too." Tom laughed, pulling them into a hug. Fun, challenging, inspiring, she was all of those things and more. Most importantly, she was human, flaws and all. And in embracing her humanity, they'd learned to see their own more clearly. As the stars blinked overhead, Tom realized something else. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just another chapter, one that would continue to evolve as they moved forward. Life doesn't follow neat timelines or tidy resolutions. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the beauty lies in the journey itself, the connections we forge, the lessons we learn, and the ways we grow together. And for Tom and his family, that journey had brought them closer than ever, not just to each other, but to the world around them. In helping someone find her footing again, they'd discovered a deeper sense of purpose. They'd learned that kindness isn't a burden. It's a gift, one that keeps giving long after the moment has passed.